Hi, everybody. Welcome. I am Mattia Lewitt. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Today, we are going to be talking about social work practice with military children and families, and I'm really glad that you are joining. Here is a bit about me. I have been a clinical social worker for a bit over 16 years. I have a lot of experience in evidence based practices, especially different kinds of cognitive behavioral therapies. I've worked in different settings in the home, schools, communities, and I've worked with kids, teens, adults, and families. I work in a private practice right now where I see people presenting with a variety of different concerns. Most of what I'm going to be talking about today comes from things that I learned and shared in a previous job when I worked at an outpatient clinic serving veterans and military families. There are a few different points that I want everyone to take away from this presentation. The first is that military kids and families are resilient. They go through tough stuff and they keep going and are able to support one another and manage despite really difficult circumstances. Military families experience unique challenges that civilian families might not understand, and we, as educators and healthcare providers, play an important role in helping support these families. So, these are the core takeaways that I want you to be thinking about as we go through this presentation together. As providers, there's a lot to know, so I want to start off with that. I'm also going to share some information about populations, demographics, how things have changed over time. We'll be talking about behavioral health challenges that you'll see with this population, veterans, military families. I'll talk about healthcare access, which is certainly a factor. We'll be spending some time on stigma and cultural competency. We'll talk about family and military service, unique challenges associated with homecomings and separation from the military, specific considerations for post 9/11 veterans, the deployment cycle, common reactions for children and teens, both emotional and behavioral, and of course, resources. As providers, there are certain things that I want to make sure we're all aware of. The first is that military families are motivated by serving others and they are resilient. They can overcome challenges through strength, flexibility, and a positive attitude. Military family separations are complicated and difficult, whether it's through a deployment, a move, a permanent change of station, a temporary move. There are all sorts of different things that might be going on, including somebody just being away temporarily because of military training, which happens a lot over the summers in particular. Interestingly, most military parents were not military children themselves. So that's something to think about too, that there sometimes is a family history of military service, but not always. On average, children of active duty service members move a lot, 6 to 9 times between kindergarten and graduation from high school, which is 3 times the national average. So that's on average 2 to 3 moves from kindergarten to high school graduation. All families are experiencing constant changes. Military families are no exception. There is a major stigma around mental health care in the military culture. That's something that we're going to be spending some time on later in the presentation. Veterans or service members can help each other out as peers. There's even a saying among many service members and veterans, got your six for got your back. Relatedly, I want to encourage everyone to learn the military lingo. Obviously, there is a ton of special vocabulary, whether we're talking about acronyms or slang that is part of military culture. And I certainly don't know all of it. I don't expect you to either, but doing the best that you can to learn the lingo helps with showing that you care and showing that you are making an effort to help this unique population. Relatedly, we want to always be creating a safe and welcoming environment that models understanding and respect for military families. So you might notice all of the seals of the different branches of the military over here. We have the Coast Guard, the Marine Corps, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Space Force. When I worked at Penn, we had a specific intention around our design. We had wooden versions of the seals. We also had an American flag. We had specific Philadelphia art because we wanted to show that we were trying to create a space for healing and respect and a, a space where all veterans and military families are welcome. No, also, not everyone in uniform can access the same programs. So if there is somebody who is on active duty, they will have access to different resources compared with somebody who is a reservist or a member of the National Guard. Um, I'll get into some of the specifics around this later, but know that not everybody has access to the same resources. It may be related to service-connected disabilities that they have. It may be related to their military service. It may be related to different things that they need treatment for or help for. We as civilian providers play a really important role, and so it's very important for us to educate ourselves and be thoughtful and do the best that we can. Okay, I'm gonna move my video so that you can see the map here. Okay. I think that's not where I want to be. Okay. As of April 2020, over 331 million people were living in the United States. That is a little bit out of date, but it's the latest data I was able to get from the Census Bureau as of now in 2025. According to 2023 population estimates, there are about 18 million living veterans. So this breaks down to 7.8 million living veterans who served during the Gulf War era, 43%. 5.6 million living veterans, 30%, who served during the Vietnam War era, 1950 to 1973. About 767,000 Korean War veterans who served in the 1940s and 50s are still alive, and that's 4% of veterans. And just under 120,000 World War II veterans are still alive, which is under 1% of all living veterans. In a 2023 Pew study, as of 2022 and 2023, there were over 18 million living veterans, as I said, which represents about 6% of the United States adult population, which is a major decrease from 1980. At that point, about 18% of U.S. adults were veterans. Following the end of the military draft in 1973, there were fewer active duty personnel because it wasn't required anymore. In 1968, with the draft, there were about 3.5 million active duty service members, which compared to today's all volunteer force is a lot. Now there are about 1.3 million service members. Fewer than 1% of all U.S. adults are active duty service members. So there are a couple of key takeaways here. One, population is changing over time. There are fewer veterans than there used to be, and there are fewer people who have connections to veterans, given the smaller percentage of the population at this point. Okay. Demographics. When we think about veterans compared to civilian populations, they are older. They're more likely to be male. They're more likely to be white, less likely to be Hispanic or Latino, less likely to be Asian, and about as likely to belong to other racial groups, such as Black or African American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander. Additionally, veterans are more educated than the general population, the civilian populations. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is that veterans are required to have completed high school, so either a GED or high school diploma. And some veterans also have completed a bachelor's degree or even graduate school. Um, this is obviously going to depend on somebody's specific experience, but some positions within the military do require more education than just high school. Okay. Next, I have a video that I really liked. This is from the Veterans Health Administration. It's called The Power of One. I wanted to share it with you because I think it gives a little bit of a taste of the ways in which veterans look out for each other. And I thought it was a nice introduction to the presentation. Welcome back. This slide is about behavioral health challenges for veterans. Now, again, there are over 18 million veterans in the United States and about 2 million military service members and 2.4 million immediate family members. So we're talking about quite a lot of people overall. Um, Veterans may be impacted by military trauma or other trauma, and compared to the general population, they do have a higher risk of PTSD. One thing that I found very interesting when I was working at my previous job is that a lot of folks we saw who needed trauma treatment needed treatment for PTSD relating to childhood experiences rather than military experiences. And we know that trauma is really prevalent in the United States and around the world, so it is something that we want to be thoughtful about. We always want to be providing trauma-informed care. We also want to know that dealing with military environments and combat experiences or exposure can be even more challenging for a lot of service members due to substance use, trauma, and other concerns. Many service members and veterans are impacted by trauma, suicidality, homelessness, criminal justice system involvement. And what this means is even if one particular person is not impacted directly, they may have a buddy who is, and so they may be impacted indirectly. About 15% of service members coming home from Iraq or Afghanistan had post traumatic stress disorder or PTSD within the past year, or 29% lifetime rates of PTSD, which is significantly higher than the general adult population. Similarly, 15 to 20% of these service members returning from Iraq or Afghanistan reported experiencing traumatic brain injury or TBI during their deployment. That's a lot of people who have had traumatic experiences during their military service, and they need specialized care and support to be able to recover and heal. Now, about 50% of returning service members needing treatment for mental health conditions sought help, but only about half of those who receive treatment receive adequate care, which is not good. We want to make sure that everybody is getting good quality, appropriate, sufficient mental health care that meets their needs. According to a 2023 survey, 14% of US veterans met the criteria for a substance use disorder in the past year, which is rather high. That's also higher than the general population. I believe it's more than twice that. The veteran population compared to the civilian population. Additionally, rates of suicide in the armed forces have been going up over time. As of 2023, there were 25.6 deaths by suicide per 100,000 total forces, most frequently deaths by firearms, which obviously are of a much higher lethality. I will talk later about how to ask questions about firearms. I know not everybody is comfortable talking about it or thinking about it, but it is something that we need to be aware of when we're working with this population. Healthcare access. This is a big thing for everybody. As you are no doubt aware, if you're watching this, the healthcare system in the US is a mess. And what that means is that it can be really difficult for people to navigate and to get the support and care that they need. Military families are really concerned about access to healthcare. According to the most recent Blue Star Families Military Family Lifestyle Survey, According or excuse me, from 2020 to 2024, the proportion of military families identifying this as a top priority doubled. That means that it's been even harder for people to get access to healthcare at a time when many people have been more concerned about their health. Almost half of active duty service members who stayed in the military longer than planned said that this was because of access to healthcare benefits. And many families struggle to find healthcare that's in network with TRICARE and often report long waits. There are a lot of reasons that this may be the case. One is that TRICARE, like other insurance, is pretty backed up in terms of reimbursements. And so many healthcare facilities and practices are finding that it's taking them longer to get paid by insurance, which creates all sorts of issues. It creates issues for the businesses, it creates issues for anybody needing services. There even has been a specific issue with TRICARE insurance not paying in a timely fashion, and that impacts military facilities, it impacts private practices and community agencies that serve a lot of military folks. So it's definitely something that you want to be aware of. Of course, this can contribute to issues with people accessing the care that they need, and it can also contribute to debt and frustration. 7% of the families surveyed in the Blue Star Families National Military Family Lifestyle Survey reported medical debt, and a third of the families owe more than $2,000, frequently from copays, deductibles, dental care, and emergency bills. Just having insurance doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're able to access your health care when you need it. Mental health care access can be challenging too. Demand for behavioral health care services went up over the past few years. Active duty service members have been more likely to seek out behavioral health services. And from 2005 to 2021, mental health diagnoses among service members quadrupled, meaning there are more people seeking healthcare, but that doesn't necessarily mean there are more therapists, psychiatrists, physicians available to help. It can be really, really difficult to find providers who are in network with TRICARE and also accepting new clients. And many areas are underserved. Sometimes families live in more rural areas, particularly if they are reservists or in the Guard. And so many areas have wait lists due to there not being enough providers and due to the mental health care crisis. As a result of all of this, service members and families might not be able to schedule appointments when they want them or even at all. Okay, now I want to talk about stigma because this is a really big deal and it's something that you need to be aware of if you're working with this population. Stigma can impact people's access to different resources that they might need, including healthcare. Active duty service members and families are eligible for care through the United States Department of Defense, but a lot of them choose not to get their health care in that way. There are a few reasons for this. Sometimes people are concerned about discrimination. Other times they might be worried about the impact on their military career or their spouse's military career. Additionally, Guard and Reserve troops who served in Iraq or Afghanistan, which is about 40% of the total, are eligible for VA healthcare for up to 5 years after returning from deployments. Even though they are eligible, a lot of Guards members and reservists are not able to access VA services or they choose not to. Many people, active duty service members, reservists, veterans, choose to seek community based care outside of the VA system. There are a lot of reasons for that. Could probably give a whole presentation as to why. The short version of this is that if people are seeking care in the community, it might not necessarily be care that is tailored to their unique needs as veterans, as service members, and therefore they might not be getting the high quality of care that they deserve. Military families have a distinct culture and unique behavioral health needs that are not always understood within the greater community. I certainly wouldn't have known much about this before working for a specialty program, and I would be willing to bet that's the case for many other people too. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, works to make community based services for veterans and family members accessible, culturally competent, and trauma informed. They do have some specific resources on their website. However, I found that it was more difficult to locate those than when I originally gave this presentation, so your mileage may vary there. Okay. Military culture and mental health culture are pretty different. So, in military culture, there's more of a focus on the collective, on the group. There's an expectation of emotional toughness. In military culture, the group mentality promotes safety. Because if you think about people being out on a deployment or in some sort of training exercise, sticking together helps with safety and helps with people being able to get through difficult experiences. In military culture, there's also an assumption of strength or power. There's a focus on the warrior mentality and skills. The warrior mentality is also called the warrior ethos or the warrior mindset. It is a unique state of mind that's characterized by mental toughness and focus and discipline. And so, if somebody identifies with this, that is probably something that would have drawn them to join the military in the first place. On the other hand, mental health culture is pretty different from military culture. It's more individually focused. There's an expectation of emotional vulnerability. There's an individual modality as opposed to a group format for the work. Especially for the people who were trained in the medical model, there's an assumption of deficiencies and illness rather than strengths. and there's a focus on symptoms and risk factors rather than skills. Okay, this next video is from the Cohen Veterans Network. This is about somebody transitioning out of the military and telling their story, and I liked it because I think it's nice to hear people's own words talking about their experiences. Welcome back. There are another pair of other specific things to be thinking about when we're talking about military culture. Compared to healthcare or behavioral healthcare cultures, which often tend to be more liberal, more progressive, military culture is significantly more socially conservative. Part of that is just the aspect of it being a large organization, and part of it is the history of the military over time. Military culture is very focused on values, service to others, giving back, community. Transition is a really key time in somebody's military career, as you heard from the video with Shelly. And we know that many veterans don't have the support that they need in transitioning out of the service. So it's really valuable for us to know that and to recognize that there's a unique opportunity to help support people. Um, because the military takes care of so many different aspects of somebody's life and provides a lot of structure, when someone is preparing to transition out, either because they are separating or because they're retiring or perhaps they're medically discharging, they might need help with finding resources for civilian employment, healthcare, housing. Civilian employment can be pretty different from military or federal employment. So people who have been in the military their whole careers may not be prepared and they may not know what they need to do to stand out and to highlight their achievements and accomplishments. Going along with the challenges that these families face, childcare issues are a really big deal for military families. Obviously, childcare issues are a big deal for any family, and we know that military families, because of moving more often, are more likely to have to deal with frequent transitions and more likely to have trouble with getting everybody's needs met. We'll talk a little bit later about spouse unemployment and underemployment. Right now, I just want you to know that this is something that you will hear a lot if you are working with this population. Part of it is the moves, part of it is that it can be really difficult to get childcare, and that might mean that somebody takes some time away from the workforce because they can't find the childcare that they need. Schools, healthcare systems, and communities often don't know a lot about the unique experiences of this population, and because of being underinformed or uninformed about these experiences, they might not be able to fully take care of all of someone's needs. However, we can educate ourselves, and by educating ourselves, we can play an affirming and supportive role in somebody getting these services and support that they need. There are a lot of positive aspects of military service. People may find that they have a sense of belonging, community, friendship, service to others through their military service, and I definitely don't want to downplay that. There also are a lot of different challenges that somebody might experience after their military service, and one of the most serious ones is homelessness. According to an assessment by the Departments of Housing and Urban Development and Veterans Affairs, 32,882 veterans reported having experienced homelessness within the past year as of January 2024. So we're talking about January 2023 to January 2024. About 19,031 veterans spent at least one night in a shelter during that year. Now, that may sound like a lot of people, and it is. That's quite a lot of people. However, there was a specific initiative started through the VA and the Department of Housing and Urban Development to decrease veteran homelessness. And over time, they have been wildly successful in doing that. When I first gave this presentation in 2018 and in 2020, I had really different statistics. Specifically, that nearly 76,000 veterans reported experiencing homelessness on a particular night in 2009, and about 136,000 veterans spent at least one night in a shelter during that year. So that is a much, much higher number. And the reason that the number is lower now, 15 years later, is through the dedicated efforts of HUD-VASH, which is a program affiliated with, again, Housing and Urban Development and VA supportive housing. Additionally, military service members were hospitalized more often in 2009 for mental and substance use disorders than for any other reason. So that's another thing to watch out for. The people may be experiencing problems with their mental health, problems with substance use that can impact their readiness and their ability to do their jobs. A 2014 treatment episode data set report stated that about 70% of homeless veterans also experienced a substance use disorder. And it's not surprising that these things co occur because we know that if somebody has serious substance use problems, it's very likely that it's impacting other areas of their lives as well. We also know that research shows the negative impacts potentially for deployment and trauma related stress on military families, especially spouses or partners and kids. So, longer deployments were associated with greater emotional difficulties for military children and more behavioral health diagnoses among U.S. Army wives. Now, you might have noticed two different things about what I just said. Number one, Army, and number two, wives. The Army is the largest branch of the military, and so it's much easier to gather data about it just because there are so many more people impacted. Also, you may remember that I said veterans are mostly male earlier, and since they're mostly male and also mostly straight, we have more data about wives than spouses of other genders. Thinking about the kids also, we know that children of deployed military personnel have more emotional difficulties compared with national samples. So these kids are having more problems at school, more problems with their families, more problems with their peers. Next, I have a video about military spouse licensing from the National Military Family Association. Some of you may already know about interstate compacts. What this means is that is easier for somebody who works in a profession that requires licensure to be able to work in another state. So let's say you were living in Texas and then your family had to move to California. Because of these new licensure compacts, it would be easier for the military spouse to be able to continue working in their chosen profession and to be able to not have a gap and a loss of income. This unfortunately is not in place for all health related and other occupations yet. It is something that has been growing over time. And the reason I wanted to share this video is that I think it does a nice job of highlighting why this is important and what military spouses and the rest of us can do. Great. Moving on, let's talk now about military spouses. So, military service impacts spouses too. There may be challenges for military spouses, as I had discussed, around establishing and maintaining their own careers, especially if they're moving more often. Childcare can be really expensive, especially if someone moves and they're no longer near family support. Childcare is also very expensive in general, as anybody knows if they've had to deal with that or talked about it with a friend. Military spouses also have to deal with transitions in schools and communities due to moves. Obviously, that's impacting the kids if they are transitioning to a new school, and it's impacting the spouses too because they might have to advocate for the kids and make sure that they're getting what they need. Similarly to academic trailing spouses or physician spouses, sometimes the military spouse may find that their partner's career is perceived as more important than theirs because of the moves and because of the unique culture in the military. Obviously, there are challenges. I also want to highlight benefits. Military spouses can potentially find community with other partners or spouses. They may have a sense of belonging to something greater, and they may feel a sense of pride in their partners for their military service. This video is from Blue Star Families. Nicole is talking about how personal and professional community impact her experience as a military spouse. She uses a couple of terms that I wanted to introduce for you just in case you're not familiar with them. The first is talking about a PCS, which is a permanent change of station. That is a move. I was discussing military moves earlier, so it would be like you were stationed in one place and then you have a new duty station someplace else. She also talks about TDY, which stands for temporary duty yonder. That is a move, but it is not a permanent change of station. Okay. I mentioned earlier that transitions are a big deal, and they are. So it's really something we want to be aware of in supporting this population. Transitions can include coming home, retiring, or separating from the military. And so this is something unique that we want to be thoughtful about just because transitions are hard in general. Um, there also are not as many resources to help veterans and families through this process, and that makes it another reason that it's a hard time. People may experience challenges occupationally. So I had talked earlier about how in the military, people don't necessarily have to apply for jobs in the same way as they do in the civilian world. So that can be an adjustment. It may be the case that families face financial concerns if somebody was getting a steady paycheck from their military job and then they are not. That can introduce a lot of financial stress. Family roles can change. So if somebody had been really busy because of their job and then they shift what they're doing, it might mean that the parents have different responsibilities or a different division of labor at home. Moving can be a really big deal. We're going to talk more about moving in a bit, but the short version is that if somebody had been living on base and then they separate from the military and are no longer living there, it may be a really big disruptor, and that can even incorporate some aspects of grief and loss. So, loss of community, loss of identity. So, all of these are things that we want to be attentive to. Furthermore, if a veteran or service member has had some sort of injury, either physical or psychological, it takes time for them to adjust and it takes time for family members to adjust as well. So, I wanted to introduce you to Sesame Street for Military Families because it is a great resource. They have lots of information on their website that is useful for educators, for providers, for kids, for families. They have a little series of videos that I thought was really cute, and I wanted to share it with you so that you can hear people explaining things in their own words. This specific video is about relocations and permanent change of station, and there are a couple of other Sesame Street for Military Families videos that I included also. Hope you enjoyed the video. I wanted to take some time to talk about the unique experiences of post 9/11 veterans. The clinic that I worked for when I worked with veterans and military family members had a particular focus on this population, and so it was something that we learned about a lot. Post September 11th, only 0.4% of American adults have served on active duty, which is the smallest percentage of any war era. Additionally, an all volunteer force means that service members are more likely to be deployed multiple times. There's a higher reliance on National Guard and reserve components. This is more disruptive for families, it's more stressful, and it can lead to more changes in family structures. Now, you might notice the picture that I selected has a lot of rainbow flags representing different identities that people may have. I chose this because the post 9/11 era has become more diverse in terms of who veterans are, both with racial identity, gender identity, and other factors. Currently, active duty forces are about 17% women, and women make up about 21% of reserve forces. So, compared to the numbers in the past, it's more likely that the deployed spouse or parent is a mother, as opposed to a father or a parent of another gender. This is obviously assuming that many families might not have two parents and that not all families have a mom and a dad. 25% of post 9/11 veterans had been diagnosed with PTSD, according to VA data, which is rather high. Deployment to Iraq or Afghanistan is often associated with a difficult adjustment to separation from the military. Compared to their civilian counterparts, post 9/11 veterans are more likely to be unemployed and underinsured after their military service and more likely to experience homelessness. Obviously, all of these are risk factors for negative outcomes, so we especially want to be attentive to making sure that somebody's financial needs are met and they have adequate health insurance. The signature wounds of the current conflicts are PTSD and TBI, so if you are working with post 9/11 veterans, you especially want to be asking questions about those experiences. Next, we have another video from Sesame Street for military families. This one is about homecomings. I hope you like it. I wanted to give everybody some information about the deployment cycle because this is a unique experience that military families go through, but it is not something where civilian families have an exact parallel. Deployment is a chronic stressor that may affect parent child relationships, spouse or partner relationships, and because it can occur multiple times, it can impact a child or adolescent's development in unique ways. When we think about the cycle of deployment, there are different phases. There's the pre-deployment phase where somebody is notified about their unit deploying, they get ready, they plan. There's the deployment phase itself when someone is leaving. The family members may take on new roles and establish new routines. Post-deployment is a really exciting time. Everyone is looking forward to coming home, readjusting to new roles in the family, and then the reintegration phase where you're sustaining changes. You might have noticed also that this is a cycle where each phase has an arrow leading into the next phase. That's because even the reintegration phase can sometimes be a new pre-deployment phase because of the operations tempo for how often certain units are deployed. Each stage of the deployment presents with its own challenges for parents and children. When service members are deployed multiple times, it means that they have a higher risk of death, injury, and PTSD. Over 2.7 million service members have deployed since 2001, and more than 2 million American children have had a parent deployed at least once. Again, this is a small number population wise, but that is a lot of service members and a lot of children altogether. For adult family members, there wasn't a significant long term impact of deployment on their relationship, their family, their psychological or behavioral health, or military integration. This was when family members who experienced a deployment were compared to family members who didn't. Unfortunately, children and teens who had a deployed family member showed more behavioral problems and they were less satisfied in their relationships with the parent who wasn't deployed. Also, traumas during deployment are associated with negative effects, as you might expect, and different kinds of traumas can lead to different outcomes. So, combat trauma was consistently associated with worse outcomes than psychological or physical trauma. I don't have the exact details as to why that is, but one thing that can happen with combat trauma is that there may be moral injury where somebody sees things that go against their values or does things that go against their values and they don't necessarily know how to make sense of that or interpret it. This is the last video for Sesame Street for military families, and this one's about deployments. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty about what military family life is like because a lot of service members have kids, 40% of them, so that's 2 out of 5. 38% of these kids are under age 5 and 70% are under age 12, so that's a lot of kids and it's a lot of young kids. I was talking before about childcare, and childcare is a really, really important issue for any working parents, which is going to be most of them. Childcare is a readiness issue because if it's not affordable, if it's not accessible, and if it's not high quality, it impacts military families in a lot of major ways. The service member themselves may be stressed or not focused at work or on their mission. Sometimes spouses need to quit their jobs because of lack of adequate or quality childcare. That means that families then only have one income, and then this can create a lot of financial stress or pressure. With school age children, there are a lot of different things that you want to look out for, whether we're talking about elementary school age, middle school age, even preschool. These kids may have emotional responses or behavioral responses due to what might be going on for them. Maybe they're feeling lonely, abandoned, worried, guilty. They may present with symptoms of depression, anxiety, or irritability. They may have new fears and worries that they didn't have before. They might have issues with their sleep. They might act out. They might start acting younger than their age. They might be angry. They might present aggressively. They might be showing oppositional behaviors. Because of family separation and changes, sometimes parents respond by becoming overprotective of their kids, and this can lead to the kids becoming more dependent on adults than would be ideal. Sometimes kids don't actually talk about what's going on, but they complain about having headaches and stomach aches. This is often something to watch out for when there's extra stress. Sometimes kids will refuse to go to school or not be interested in school, even if they liked it before. They may not do as well at school, either academically, socially, behaviorally. And kids may present with more distractibility and less ability to focus because they're having a really hard time. When we think about the issues at school for military kids, there's a lot that could be going on. If there's a family deployment, move, or loss, kids may show academic issues, so not doing as well, lower grades, things like that. They might be acting up at school. Kids might be missing their friends, their family, and their community, especially if they moved. Being the new kid in school can lead to the kids feeling lonely or left out. Sometimes there are issues with bullying. Military children might find that they have a greater sense of connection to other military children compared with civilian children. Changes in rules can be a really big deal. When we think about the things that help kids thrive, it's predictability, consistency, safety. If kids are going to one school and then another, and the schools have different rules, they have different expectations, it can be really disruptive and confusing, especially for younger kids who may not know what's going on and who may not be accustomed to that. Sometimes kids will have issues academically. It might be that they had a learning gap because they learned one thing at their first school and then another thing at the second school, but they didn't get the information in between. Or maybe they learned the same subject twice. Sometimes it's difficult to get records to transfer from one school to another, which again adds extra to the plate of military spouse and the service member in trying to make sure that their kids are situated appropriately. Qualifications for special education and gifted education can vary from one state to another, so that's something where kids might not have access to the support services they need, and that can contribute to problems with learning. So it might be that a student needed specific accommodations to be able to succeed at school, and then they weren't getting that anymore and they started to struggle. Schools can also have different sports and activities. So let's say that your student was really into soccer, but then they went to a new school and they didn't have soccer available anymore. Probably they're going to miss it, feel a sense of loss. Maybe they're not that interested in playing basketball, baseball, or hockey, even though that's what's available in their new school, in their new community. Kids might also have different activities at one school versus another. Maybe you have a student who's really into art or really into music, and that program may not be available in their new school, which means that they are not getting access to the things that they really like, so they may be less interested in school as a result. You may see similar things with teenagers compared to what you're going to see with younger children. An additional factor is that teens may become resentful when they had extra responsibilities and extra independence when a parent was away. And then when their parent or caregiver comes home, they may be really upset about not being able to have the same privileges, independence, and responsibilities. Changes in grades, obviously, is something we want to be aware of when we're thinking about school age kids. Teens might also be distracted more easily than usual. They might be overtired. We know that teens struggle with sleep just because of the school schedule not being set up in a way that suits their circadian rhythm. it might be hard for them to concentrate, especially if they're upset in some way. They may not be as interested in their activities as before, so maybe they used to participate in drama, and then they're like, no, I actually don't want to go out for the play this year. Stuff like that. And a common thing that we see with teens, excuse me, is not wanting to open up about what's wrong. That's pretty normal, but it also is something where if they had been open with you about what was going on before and that changes, you do want to be aware of that and try to figure out how you can help support them through it. Now, I know I just talked about a lot of challenges. I really want to be clear. There are so many positive impacts on military children when their parents are in the service. Having a family culture of service is really great. Can contribute to a lot of very positive values. Military families are very involved in their communities. They have high rates of volunteerism and civic engagement, especially compared with civilian communities. Military kids are connected to military families and military communities and can experience a lot of meaning in that. There is even a unique program called Purple Up, which is a military kids camp. There are lots of great resources like that if you look for them. Military kids are resilient and adaptable. They may experience a sense of pride in their parents' work. And compared to other kids, they may be more responsible and more independent because they learned these skills and they learned that they had to do things like that. Now, obviously, there are lots of positive things about military service, but military families can also have some negative impacts on the kids from the military service. So it may be that parental deployment impacts kids' relationships with their parents, both the parent who's at home and the parent who is deployed. Sometimes parents will return from deployment and be different, which can be confusing or scary for kids. Parental loss, obviously, that's something that's going to be a really big deal, even if it's lost due to separation rather than due to injury or death. Parent behavioral health diagnosis or injury, frequent wounds, which I spoke about before, that can have repercussions academically, socially, and emotionally, family separation, and differences between military and civilian cultures. As educators and healthcare providers, we play a unique role. What you already know about working with children and families applies here too. Think about the variety of different family arrangements that you may see: two parent families, single parent families, grandparents or other relatives raising kids, and so on. You want to ask about military or veteran status for the individual and for the family if you are a healthcare provider. Obviously, not everybody is going to do that, but it's really a big deal to help people feel welcomed and included when you do ask. That said, we want to be really thoughtful about how we ask about somebody's military experiences, and I'll talk about questions you can ask in the next slide. We definitely do not want to ask casually or lightly about the details of somebody's experiences in combat. We want to focus on developing sensitivity and military cultural competency, and we want to use a strengths-based approach, as we would want to do with any population, but particularly for this population. We want to encourage family members and veterans to seek help. If we have the authority to do so, we might want to consider encouraging our program to consider screening for PTSD in healthcare settings. There are free and short measures available publicly. So if you look up the PTSD, it is a brief questionnaire that is yes or no, and will give you some information about who might benefit from additional assessment. When possible, pay attention to holidays, events, campaigns that are focused on supporting the military or veterans. Learn about local organizations in your area that support veterans and families. Maybe you have a VSO, maybe you have a base, maybe you have some organizations that are specifically dedicated to military families in your area. Take the time to do the research and see what's out there. If possible, you want to refer clients to the VA, to Cohen Veterans Network, to TRICARE providers, to Give an Hour, and to other resources that have particular expertise in serving veterans and military families. It helps people feel a sense of belonging, it helps people feel welcomed and included, and it makes it easier to ensure that people are getting what they need. Next, I have a video about firearm safety from the Veterans Crisis Line. I wanted to have you watch this video because I think it's so important for us to remember to ask about firearms with this population. So, some of the questions that you can ask as a healthcare provider, especially if you are a pediatrician, another physician, a therapist, is things like, do you have any firearms at home? How are they stored? Do you need gun locks? If somebody you're working with is having suicidal ideation or other issues around suicidality, you might want to ask them, do you have a safe person who could take care of your guns for you temporarily while we're working on helping you get through this? In addition to asking about firearms, which obviously we do want to do that, I wanted to give you some examples of other questions that you can ask military or veteran clients and their families. You can ask, which branch of the military did you serve in? How did you choose to join that branch? Where were you stationed? What was your military occupational specialty or MOS? What kind of work did you do? Did you ever deploy? Did you want to deploy if you didn't? Did you want to deploy if you did? What was your experience in the military like? For family members, we can ask, how were you affected by your family member's military service? We can ask service members and veterans, what were some of your reasons for joining the military? Was there a family tradition or a family history of military service? Maybe people joined because of the benefits. A lot of service members choose to join the military because of educational benefits, sometimes for other benefits as well. People may identify with the warrior mentality. Sometimes people join the military as a way to escape bad circumstances, so maybe poverty, trauma, difficult family situations, things like that. I have a ton of resources. This is not even all of the resources I have, believe it or not. And I wanted to share these with you because these are a few of my favorites. National Child Traumatic Stress Network. This has so many resources on different child trauma types. It also has specific resources for military families, whether it's talking about deployment, talking about grief and loss, all sorts of different things. It is an excellent website if you work with kids who have experienced trauma, and if you work with kids who do, then you want to bookmark this. I mentioned SAMHSA earlier, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Their website has lots of good resources. It was a little bit more difficult to track down the military specific resources than when I first gave this presentation. So, again, maybe you need to do some Google sleuthing or something like that to find what you're looking for, but it is there or it is archived, even if it's not there now. Blue Star Families, I had mentioned them a couple of different times. They are a fabulous resource for learning about the experiences of military families. Sesame Street for Military Families, I talked about as well. They have specific resources that I think are going to be really helpful for families with young children and families that need some extra support around transitions. Military One Source is designed to be a one-stop shop, so it is a really good resource for folks who are in the military, and it's good to see what is out there. National Military Family Association, I had shared some information from them as well. Um, if you're specifically looking for information on helping spouses and families, that is a great starting point. Blue Star Academy, started by one of my former colleagues. He and his family started this organization to help provide educational resources for military kids. It's great. Definitely check it out. It has a lot of COVID specific resources, which may be a little bit less relevant now, but there's a lot of great stuff on there. The Department of Veterans Affairs, which is the VA, and the Center for Deployment Psychology. Lots of good learning and educational resources available for you. Now, I have a ton of references. I'm not going to read this to you because that's not necessary, but in case you're curious about where some of my data and information came from, definitely check this out. More references. even more references? Okay. If you still have questions, please be in touch with me. I would love to help. I also currently work for a private practice that accepts TRICARE insurance. So if you want to send me referrals, that would be awesome. If you want to learn more, please drop me a line. You can email me. My current work email is mattia.lewitt@lifebulb.com. If I have moved on from there and I'm not there anymore, you can reach me at LinkedIn. I would love to help you out, and I really appreciate you spending some time with me, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this continuing education course from Agents of Change. Want to earn your CE credits for this course? Visit agentsofchangetraining.com or the link in the description to purchase the course and take the post test. If you're looking for more CEs, check out our unlimited plan. You will get unlimited access to 150 plus ASWB and NBCC approved continuing education courses for one low annual fee. We're always adding new courses. Did I mention we also have 5 free CE credits available too? Check it out at agentsofchangetraining.com.